Who do you think knows more, him or me?
Hi Lumineers, welcome to the lighter side, San Francisco! That's for you. Jesse really wanted a big opening. We are so excited to be here in California and can't wait to come back, right? Colleen is already grooming some in-person classes here in the San Francisco area. We'll keep you posted. Today, I want to let you know our episode is a little bit different. Yes, we're in San Fran. We have a different set, but we also have some off-camera co-hosts named Tiger and Lily. And these cats most likely will jump up and join us on the couch today. So enjoy these little beings of light. No, enjoy these Lumacats. We have Lumacats on set now. I love you guys. Today we have with us the Dan Drasin. Yay! Jazz hands introduction. We talked about that before, which scared the Lumacats, and they're not on the couch with us anymore. As I mentioned, Lumineers, we are in San Fran, so we're trading our ambient train sound for some seaplanes and helicopters. So please bear with us as we work around our background sound and we get into the world of Dan Drasin, which there's so many things that I want to ask. But before we get into it, really, here's some housekeeping notes for you guys. I know, favorite time, yay! Well, Lumineers, you're constantly asking us, hey, what's going on? Where are you going? Where can we show up? And I want to let you know that if you want it all organized and laid out perfectly, please head over to the website, jamiebutlermedium.com, sign up for the newsletter. And Lumineers, if you love what we're doing here at the Lighter Side Network, please share with a friend, like us on Facebook, the Lighter Side Network, and check out our new annual subscription for gifts. Great for the holiday season. So let's dive into the world of Dan, getting to know you as a filmmaker, as a media expertise. I know we talked a little bit before about Dan, how can I introduce you? I kind of ask this of everybody when we come on, like, what do you want to show the Lumineers? Because you've done so much incredible work in the film industry, especially with EVPs, which Lumineers electronic voice phenomena, and many other things wrapping around the phenomena of explaining, can I be as loose as saying the beyond, or
Sure.
communication to the beyond, and science. I mean, you're really standing in the middle of the bridge, kind of demanding both sides come and meet in the middle,
Right.
which I find fascinating. You have the language, the expertise, the experience, and practice behind all of what I do, mainly in the spiritual and the beyond realm. You have it in the scientific and are sandwiching them together.
Yeah, and it's not always an easy place to be,
I can imagine.
because the skeptics are always nipping at your heels, not really paying attention to what you're actually doing and saying and proposing, but they have their own belief system. The extreme skeptics are rather a cult, you might say. There are a small number, unfortunately relatively small number, of real scientists who are dipping their feet into this pool and finding that there is some real science available that's been done for years, and areas in which new science can be done. The culture of science makes this very difficult. The cultures of science and academia make this very difficult, because each of these fields has its own traditions, its own beliefs. People in academia have to put food on the table, and they can't step out too far. It's true in any field. So I've been fortunate in that I don't have a stake in any of these fields. As a media producer and, you might say, journalist in this field, I can sort of come and go as I please and just pull together evidence, put it out there, and people can take it or leave it. But hopefully I've presented the most interesting and compelling evidence available that can demonstrate to people who are more materialistically oriented that that's not the whole picture.
But I was going to say, you did a wonderful job in that with your feature film, the feature documentary, Calling Earth.
Thank you.
That was incredible. And I watched it a while ago, and Dan just informed me that he added more to it, that it's still growing. So now I'm really excited to go back and see it again. And we can find that online. And Lumineers, I'll put all of the links to everywhere to find Dan just below the description, because I don't want to get hung up there. I want to dive into all these things. But you mentioned a little bit ago real scientists, and that was the term. That kind of stuck out to me. What does that mean? I mean, you have a degree, right? Does that make you the real scientist, or
Well,
what's
in
your
the culture
definition?
of in the culture of science, having a degree makes you a real scientist. But there are well, and there are many different sciences. Science, in general, has a certain kind of approach to things, but each specialized area of science has its own disciplines, and its own procedures and so forth. Unfortunately, the field of paranormal science, also known as PSI, or parapsychology, is too little known in the culture. But it's been around for a long time, and a lot of careful science has been done, even going back into the 19th century. So there are many sort of doors and windows into this field, and people sort of have to discover it in their own way and get into it in a way that's meaningful to them. There's no kind of one-size-fits-all approach to this. People in biology may look at it in one way, and people in physics or psychology and so on will sometimes connect to it in odd ways and then suddenly become interested in it and actually follow and understand the science that's been done. The cult of skepticism holds that none of this is valid. No science has ever been done. There's no there, and that's that. So it's all fakery and or misinterpretation. But when you really look into it, you find that that's just silly.
Is it frustrating to have those skeptics when all the information is sitting there that they haven't looked at it and come up to their own conclusion that it's either real or not? How do you approach somebody in that way?
It can be frustrating. I basically ignore it.
You do?
I mean, I can't not pay attention to it, but because it affects the field. But I just do what I do and put it out there, and people can take it or leave it. I haven't heard anything from the skeptics so far about the film.
Film is phenomenal
there was
and spooky, like in such a great way. You have no idea, Lumineers. Top of your list, priority.
There was actually once when an earlier version of the film went online, I got one comment from a skeptic, and it was an unhinged rant, basically, and that was it.
That was it?
Yeah, all the other comments have been either asking questions or have been very complimentary. So I'm very pleased.
How did you get into this?
Well, how far back do you want to go? Childhood?
The history of Dan. Well, yeah, if it started as a spark in childhood, because I think that really helps listeners to recall those experiences as being important and valuable, because we often think things you do as a kid is just the kid life, and that's another, old chapter, and you can't rely on it, but...
Well, what started happening to me in early childhood is I began having precognitive dreams.
Whoa.
Quite a few. And I just kind of regarded them as, a bit strange, but normal. I thought everyone did. And I soon found out that wasn't the case, and then I found out I needed to keep my mouth shut about it. But the important thing was that it demonstrated to me that the reality that we're all socialized into as we grow up is not the whole picture.
Mm-mm.
Stuff is going on backstage.
Oh, I like
and
that.
although at that point I didn't have very much of an understanding of what that might be, it was enough for me to understand that the normal picture of reality wasn't the whole picture. And so at that point I became open to all kinds of information that was beginning to come out. This was back in the 1940s. And the first thing that caught my interest was the whole field of UFO research, which became visible in the 1940s, historically. Until the 1950s, it was a perfectly legitimate topic for discussion, even in scientific circles. And when a sort of curtain came down in the 50s for a number of reasons, And then the whole the ridicule and the conspiracy theory business and all that started, and kind of put a wet blanket on it. But a lot of people continued to have certain experiences, to research the field, to write about it. Many books were written, but the popular consciousness remained fairly unaware of this as a real phenomenon.
Why do you think the curtain came down? Were we not ready? Was it a cover-up to something larger, in your opinion?
It's an interesting and complicated question, and I think it boils down to two main things. There, on the one hand, it appears that the technology that was discovered after some UFO crashes was considered very valuable. It's been argued that some of our modern technology has been derived from that. This is since the late 1940s. So there's a kind of a lid that's been put on this. Initially there were fears that if this got out, the Russians would get the technology. So there was some quasi-legitimate defense considerations. Probably the most valid consideration is that when you really look into this subject, you find that it's more than just little green men in metallic spacecraft. That there are dimensions to this that our current worldview is not really ready, has not been ready to accept. And to put it bluntly, certain people in government decided, perhaps somewhat wisely, that this truth had to be doled out slowly, for fear that people would just go nuts if they suddenly encountered phenomena that was completely beyond their explanation and their understanding. Existing institutions, educational, religious, and so on, could be faced with really shock to the system.
Yeah, and
so
potentially a collapse.
Potentially a collapse, and perhaps a very chaotic one. And one thing that can happen in a collapse is that new factions arise that opportunistically try to fill the vacuum and create new belief systems and power structures and so on top of that. So it was and has been a very dicey situation. I think probably at this point, because of popular fiction and books and so on, we're ready for a little more. And I have a feeling that's going to start coming out more and more over the next few years. And I think rather than an official revelation or official disclosure, people will just wake up one morning and consider it normal.
Yes.
It's not going to happen tomorrow, and it may not happen in our lifetimes, but it's inevitable, and it will happen sooner or later.
So I can see where that played a big influence for you, and especially being a young man during that time.
Yeah.
So if the whole UFO kind of, all that damped down, wet ragged, I think you said it, like dampened it down, where did those people migrate into? Did the scientists, did they start getting into the paranormal?
A few did. Probably many more do it quietly and secretly. May not even tell their families. Because you have to be, in the sciences and in academia, you have to be very, very careful and very conservative. And there are some good reasons for that.
Yeah.
But in any situation, the balance between stability and novelty is something that has to be handled consciously.
And I still sit in novelty.
Oh, novelty's in this one.
Oh, sorry. This hand. So this whole spiritual, metaphysical, paranormal, all of that is...
That's a space that you tend to hold, right? Others tend to hold this space. And I think there's a, for those of us who are down the rabbit hole and holding the novelty space, I think we still need to respect, as people, those who hold different views.
Yes.
And those who've been raised in a more conventional or rigid or fearful environment or whatever. And it's easy for us to feel maybe a little self-righteous because we're at the leading edge and we can demonstrate all this to people. And yet people move at their own pace. So, we we can be who we are within our own culture, and either people will join it or they won't. And we find that more and more people are joining it. And we're finding that a lot more people had these events in their childhood that they haven't been able to speak about. And now, oh my God, now we have people to talk to about it. So this is happening. And we're glad that you're here in the Bay Area, because this is one of the centers where it's a little easier
It is.
To find people of like mind and spirit. They're everywhere, but here we have a tradition of that here. Organizations like the Institute of Noetic Sciences are based here.
Yes.
And they've been doing excellent work over the past several decades
You've
in
been
these areas.
working with them on and off, haven't you?
I've worked with them on and off, yes, and also with New Dimensions Radio, which has been going on since 1973 and is still going strong.
It's a great year.
Week after week. We're still cranking out interviews, one a week for now 44 years. So
this is the only math Lumineers I'll be able to do, because I was born in 73.
all right.
For 44 years, you guys have
Right.
been kicking it on the radio.
Yeah, we're still kicking it, and now doing podcasts and so on. You can put some of that information in with the
Absolutely.
with this.
Yeah, because I noticed
video.
you did a podcast with Rupert Sheldrake, which is high on my list to like meet and have dinner with and hang out with.
He's a wonderful person. I've known him since 1980.
Really?
Yes, I was on a film job in Stockholm. I was telling a friend of mine there about Sheldrake, whose book was not even available in the United States at that time. It had just been published in Europe. I read a small article about the book, and I got it, what he was about and what his work was about, and I got really excited. So I'm in Stockholm, and I'm telling this friend of mine there about Sheldrake, and you got to get this book. And next day she calls me and says, Sheldrake's in town, giving a talk. So we went down and saw his talk, and I met him, and we've been friends since then. I wrote the first articles about him in the United States, and did a long documentary radio program for New Dimensions about his work. This is back in the 80s, and I've admired him so much. Not least because he had the guts to stand up, present his theories. He's weathered a huge amount of ignorant criticism.
Yeah,
basically.
terrible
Yeah.
stuff.
And he's a wonderful person with a great wit, and a great patience with the skeptics, I should say. Probably more than I have.
So, Dan, thank you for being the first person to write articles and bring them to the States, because that's how I was introduced to him then.
Oh, well, you're very welcome, and you're all very welcome. Yes.
I think that is so cool.
And another really good scientist in this field is Dean Radin at the
Yes.
Institute of Noetic Sciences, who's also got a great wit. And he is noted for being a very, what I would call a good skeptic. He's properly skeptical in the scientific sense. He wants solid evidence of things before he's personally willing to go there, and I really admire that. And we have abused the term skeptic, let me say. He is properly skeptical, I would say.
What I like about him is I've recognized in his works that he understands the sensitivity and running experiments with energy in general. I mean, really what we're talking about and all the experiments we're looking at, whether it's communication to beyond or telepathic or precognitive experiences, remote viewing, is energy. And he writes well about the, if you add another person to the room, or if you change something to the element, even the timing and the day, and that each moment we're looking at, we have a new set of energy. So we can't replicate the experiments in an actual detail, minute detail. It's just not going to happen. And for a scientist to kind of come out and explain it that way, it's a big relief. It's a thank you, and it's honoring. It's an honoring of something that the empathic and sensitive people know, that there's no replication.
There's no absolute replication when
No
people are
absolute
involved.
replication.
And,
Yes.
and this is another very important thing about science, that I think our healthiest relationship to science is when we understand that science does the best it can at any particular point with the tools it has, with the experience it has, and that its results are never to be taken as definitive. Science was never constituted to be definitive.
Just say that one more time directly at the camera.
Science was never designed to be definitive. It was designed to evolve based on the best knowledge we have at any point in time. It was, to put it simply, it was initially an effort to distance itself from the hierarchical institution of the church. It was all about having the freedom to do one's own experiments and to make one's own discoveries, create one's own theories, test them to see whether they can hold water or we're just fooling ourselves. But science is a never-ending evolutionary process. And those who have dogmatic views, skeptical or otherwise, skeptics over here, believers over here, I think don't really understand the process. It's a living process. It's an ongoing process, just the same as our own personal evolution is. You might say it's eternal and open-ended. And that is science properly understood, in my opinion. When it starts getting rigid or you start getting beliefs about finality or anything absolute, to me that constitutes scientific malpractice. And we need to get beyond that.
Oh, I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah. There's healthy scientific practice and there's malpractice. And I think we need to be very, very careful with all that. Science, the popular image of science is, someone in a lab coat with a clipboard,
Yes.
in a laboratory with test tubes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an iconic image. And there's a little bit of truth to it, but not much.
Just the white coat.
The white coat, the clipboard. It's the clipboard.
It's the clipboard. Oh, I was so close.
You got to keep good records of things. But no, and we are all, in our own ways, in our everyday lives, scientific in one way or another. We try things to see if they work or not. That's simple science. Someone tells us we can do something or we can't do something. Try it yourself, see if it works. It's called empirical science. You try it. You don't take anyone else's word for it. That's it. That's empirical science in a nutshell, right?
I like the nutshell.
And that's what, as science began to evolve in the Renaissance, that's basically what it was about. It was the freedom to ask questions, the freedom to do experiments that might illuminate some mystery. And, as you say, however, when it gets into human areas, from the biological on one end to the consciousness on the other, there are so many more details and variables and unknowns than our senses are capable of picking up and understanding. Our senses are very narrow, and you might say they're deliberately narrow, because they create the world that we think is real out there. They create its limits. One of the things that science has given us is the understanding that even the objective reality that we think is out there is much more interesting and much more detailed and much more alive than our senses can perceive or project, you might say. So that's the gift of science, and it's the gift of, what you're demonstrating with your mediumship and other mediums are doing is a form of science, a form of empirical science to us, demonstrating to us that there's more than our normal senses are focused on, and that some of us have the ability to, however each of us does it, to expand the perception of reality.
Is this what you put behind the lens when you go out there to film, or should I say report?
Yeah, I consider myself a journalist in this field, if you want to put it that way. I try to find the people who are doing the best work in this field, let them speak for themselves. Obviously I have to make my own editorial decisions in the editing room. The footage that ended up as my film was originally 100 hours of footage that my
Oh my
then
goodness.
co-producer Tim Coleman and I shot around the United States, England, Scotland, and Spain over a period of, that was a period of 4 years out of 15, which is the whole span of time it took to make this film. So, and we actually were shooting several films at the same time. Tim went off and finished his film, or his version of our film about the skull experiment, which we can talk about later. That's a whole another really fascinating thing. And I completed our film on instrumental transcommunication, which is the blanket term for communication from the other side through modern electronics.
Wow.
And
Do you even use the term EVP anymore?
well, EVP is a subset of it. It specifically has to do with voices, but ITC as a whole involves voices, faxes, computer messages, and photography, video, and so on. So all of our modern electronic media now are involved in this in one way or another, or can be involved in it in one way or another. So,
You know, I have so many questions in my head right now. I really
Go
want to
ahead.
ask, like,
Ask
what's
them.
the most, like, shocking, stunning EVP that you've heard, or even ITC is what you're calling?
yeah.
ITC that you've come across visually? I would love to know that, because there's some that you have in Calling Earth, the documentary that is, it, because I know you and I've met you, I know it's absolutely real. You do not report or represent something that you could easily debunk or show that it was not panning out. Like, this is...
Well, there was...
Wow. This, no words.
Well, let me sort of start it with some history of this phenomenon.
Great.
And then we'll work up to the film. Back in the 1950s, when tape recorders first became available as consumer items, some people started hearing faint voices on tapes that shouldn't be there. Say brand new tapes that they put on the machine, and voices were heard. And for the most part, these were sort of dismissed as, well, maybe the machine's picking up a radio broadcast or something. And very few people, at least in the United States, paid attention to this. But in Europe, a few people became interested in this. One, probably the pioneer in this field, was a Swedish actor, filmmaker, artist, opera singer named Friedrich Jürgensen. And he discovered EVP accidentally one night. He was recording, he went out one night to record nocturnal bird sounds for a documentary he was making. And when he played the tape back, he heard faint voices on the tape discussing nocturnal bird sounds. So,
Well,
what's going on here?
at least they're helpful.
So, right. And then subsequently he heard his deceased mother's voice calling him by his childhood nickname. So, being of sound mind and of scientific bent, he started experimenting. And so he would roll his tape recorder, he'd ask a question into the microphone, leave a pause, ask another question, leave a pause, and then he'd play the tape back, and in those pauses would be responses to his questions. So, and he recorded thousands of these voices over time, and he wrote several books about it. His work was noticed by a Latvian psychologist by the name of Konstantin Raudeva. Studied with Jürgensen for a while, then went off and did his own experiments. And before he passed on, he recorded something like 60 or 70,000 of these voices,
Oh my gosh.
which were many were direct responses to questions he'd asked. He then passed and started coming through the equipment of other experimenters. And this has been a tradition. The experimenters pass on, and they're the first to come through to their colleagues who are still in the body. So, and Jürgensen had an incredible talent for maintaining lengthy transmissions or messages, whatever you want to call them. Normally, these the electronic voices are very short, a matter of seconds. We don't know why, except I think we can generalize that it's simply difficult to get the intelligence, the information, and the energy from one level to another, to bring it down to the physical level. It's one thing when a medium can sort of reach up and meet them halfway. Equipment can't do that. So those on the other side have to try extra hard, and they sort of have to hang out close to the physical plane
Right.
to do this, which isn't necessarily comfortable. There's apparently a discipline involved in maintaining that relationship with the physical plane to do this. So and back to Raudava, who's he's the undisputed champ of communicators because he's been able to sustain EVP messages through radio, telephone, and tape for many seconds to many minutes.
Minutes?
Yes, and you'll see some of this in my film.
Yes, you do.
So then what started to happen back in the mid-'80s to mid-'90s, which was sort of the golden age of the early experimentation in this field, there were some people in Europe who started receiving messages by fax, by simple home computers, which were really just coming in at that time. And these were simple computers that had no connection to a network or anything. And text-based messages would show up in these computers with information for particular people. Images started showing up. They sort of looked like paste-up collages, which is one reason why the skeptics jumped on them. But Photoshop hadn't been invented then yet, so this could have been done with paste-ups and that sort of thing. But the people who brought these through really didn't apparently have the talent or the skill to do that. And so then came Mark Macy, who's a fellow who lives near Boulder, Colorado, who started communicating with all of these experimenters, kind of brought them to help bring them together for a while in a sort of an organization, did some of his own experimenting. He's also featured in my film. And a sort of a group of like minds coalesced for a few years. And then what happened was that some divisions turned up in that group. There were some disagreements. And the moment that the disagreements occurred, everyone's work sort of collapsed. The contact fields, as they called it, collapsed because there was some dissension between members of the group. And at that point, individuals could still do the work, but the group could not function and could not pull their energy together to create the synergy that made it easier for this phenomenon to occur. Mark wrote about this in a book called Miracles in the Storm. So people have continued to do this work and to advance it, but it hasn't been organized since then. So there's less synergy, but it's happening in spite of that. So moving on to, I'll be a spoiler here and talk about something that's something in the film.
Wait.
What?
Is it a bad spoiler?
No.
Like, he's laughing because I don't want you to give so much away.
Oh, right.
Because I do want the Lumineers, to watch
Right.
it. It's well worth the time. So maybe what we can do is I can keep you longer today, and we can
Sure.
create a part 2. And in part 2, we can put all the spoilers and really talk about things. And then the Lumineers can decide to wait to watch before you have time to see Calling Earth.
Well, there's also a 6-minute trailer that people can watch, and you can put the link online as well. So they can watch that first, and then it will sort of should automatically send them on to the main film. So several ways of getting to it. Well, hi there.
This is Tiger.
Hi, Tiger. Hi, Tiger.
It does. It
Do
gives
you have a message for us?
Do animals ever show up on the ITCs?
In some of these early images that came through the computers, there were animals. I don't know how you see it, and I'm going to be interviewing Grace a little later today, and I'm
Yes.
really curious to ask her from her point of view how this is experienced. But my understanding is that the spirit world, or the afterlife, or the before life, or whatever, however you want to call it, the everlife, exists on many levels. I think a useful kind of crude metaphor is like a multi-story building, where we'd say that the physical aspect of our planet, and all planets, the physical aspect of things might be the basement, and then biology begins at the first floor, and then you might say that we and the animals are on the second and third floors, and so on, however you want to picture it, and that there's an infinity of levels or stories in the building, and at the top on the roof there's no limits. There's no walls, right? There's no nothing as we understand it. So I think that these communications through technology tend to come from maybe the fourth level, fifth level. Mediums can reach maybe up to the sixth or seventh story. Beyond that, as far as I know, all or most of the information that we get is from near-death experiencers, because they shoot up to the top very, very often, and then they bounce back down. But they tend, and they're unique in their ability to come back. These are mostly ordinary people who come back, and in their own testimony, if they can't express it verbally, if you can just be in their presence, you get some of what they have experienced at these higher levels. But these are supraverbal levels where you can't really bring back words.
It's too confining to
It's
use
too
our
confining.
spoken language.
Here in the Bay Area, we have 3 or 4 chapters of IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And so those meetings that are held once a month in these various places have sort of become my church, you might say, over the past few years. Just being in the presence of people who've had this experience. It's like, are you familiar with the term darshan?
Yes.
Right. It's the energy of being in the presence of people who have had this experience. So, I mean, their stories are amazing enough, but the energy that comes through when they tell their stories is, to me, the deeper message. So, we have all these wonderful resources. We have ITC, we have mediumship, and we have those who've been there and come back to begin to give us some sense of the magnitude of what's outside of our assumed sense of reality.
Our floor,
Our,
as
yes,
you put it.
yeah, our floor, our department, our office, however, whatever metaphor you want to use, the physical world as we perceive it. And by the way, I have no idea how you perceive the physical world. We can agree there's a table here, and we're sitting on couches, but I have no idea how you perceive what we can agree is here.
There's a lot more here. Like Lily, the sister, showing her best side.
Yes.
Lily.
Or how this one perceives what we think is here. And I'm talking about like ordinary people, not mediums. I'm saying that.
Right.
I'll give you a story. Some years ago, I was up on one of the hills overlooking the Bay Area with a friend of mine. And we spent about an hour chatting, and we're looking over the Bay Area. It's a beautiful day. We could see the whole area, the bay, the cities, and for up there maybe 2 hours. And there was this big blimp that was flying back and forth over the city. And when we were done, we're walking back to the car, and I sort of made a brief reference to the blimp. And my friend says, "What blimp?"
Can't see it.
She didn't see it at all, or it didn't register. So what do we see, and what do we notice? You and I could walk out. This is this is someone else's living room here.
Mm-hmm.
You and I could walk out of here and compare notes about what we've noticed in this room, and we'd have completely different stories about it. I could go into your living room for 30 seconds, we both come out, compare stories. I would have seen a room full of furniture. You would have a lifetime of associations with the contents of that room.
Yes.
Completely different and richer mental picture.
And that right there shapes everybody's experiences,
Right.
no matter where they go, their belief systems.
And their motives, right? Degree of curiosity, experience, professional experience. As a scientist, a photographer, a naturalist, will notice completely different things in the environment. Anyway, the general point here is that our particular perspective, our personal history, our genetics, the culture in which we grew up, our society, our professional training, our relationships, they will all determine what we notice and how we construct reality. You know, a physicist can measure everything in this room and come up with, a fairly thorough objective description, but that's like it's the surface of things. It's the crust on the pie. And we're talking about the filling here, that has, the crust on the pie is two-dimensional, right? And then there's the filling. And I think we're all beginning in our own way to discover the depth and the flavor of that pie, if you will. And it's a pretty deep dish pie, if you want to use that metaphor.
I love it.
And I think it's great fun to make these discoveries. I think the fun part is important because it tends to dissipate a lot of the spookiness factor that people associate with death and the other side and so on. I mean, this just passed Halloween, and we've seen ghosts and goblins and spiders and all these threatening images. And I think our culture needs to back out of this a bit. That, there's some, our physical creatures need to have survival instincts. There needs to be some, instinctual fear of death that keeps us from doing really stupid things and killing ourselves. But emotionally and spiritually and psychologically, we don't really need that. So I think becoming curious and fascinated with this entire field and enjoying the exploration is a really important part of all this.
I agree, hands down. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You have been able to put words to what I want to convey, honestly. And I think one of my strong suits is that I don't have the words to explain it. So I talk around much like a kindergarten teacher. And I use very average language to get this across.
And that's important.
Yes, it helps it digest it. But, inside of me, I so want that right analogy or metaphor or description. And listening to you it so resonated deep.
At your service.
Great.
And
I
send people to you and your website and so on and your videos because you exemplify the joy and the fun and the ease and the lightness of this entire process of exploring and bringing in information and communication.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right, Lumineers, we're going to close up. This is just going to be part 1. We're going to leave all the spoiler alerts, the stories of what Dan has seen, come across, found. You definitely want to stay tuned. But please go see Calling Earth first. All the links are below. You have to do it. Get some popcorn. Call Colleen. She'll walk you through. I'm kidding. Colleen's like, what? No, edit it. Thank you so much for lending us your ears, your eyes, for staying present with us, and for allowing this to be here. We are here because of you. And remember, it's not woo-woo, it's true. He said it. That's awesome. Next time I'm going to have you just say it.
True.
The lighter side with Jamie. The lighter side with Jamie. The lighter lighter side.